Valentina Gomez is a Colombian-American anti-Islam influencer who last month failed miserably in her attempt to be a Republican congressional candidate in Texas, losing by 50% in the primary despite raising six figures of campaign funds. Since then, she's moved on to her next stunt, trying to court the British far right at Tommy Robinson's upcoming Unite the Kingdom rally in May. Last week, she posted this on Twitter. Visa approved. See you on May the 16th in England. At Keir Starmer Shabana Mahmood, UK Home Office, you're only good at protecting the Muslim rape gangs. Try to arrest me and see what happens. England belongs to the English, not to the Mohammeds. Well, in her hubris, this public display of her intentions brought enough notoriety and public outcry to lead to the UK government revoking her visa. Just as Kanye West before her, the government concluded her presence would not be, quote, conducive to the public good, due to both of her extremist beliefs. You can't keep her out of the spotlight too long, even if you can keep her out of the country. And what appears to be a desperate bid to remain relevant, she spoke to YouTuber Piers Morgan about her visa cancellation yesterday, where she was pressed by him on her demonization of the Muslim community.
I am asking you, because you brand all Muslims with the same way that you brand the people that committed the grooming gang scandal. You brand all Muslims the same way, but you have no idea how many Muslims there are. There are nearly 2 billion Muslims in this world. And what you're doing when you talk about them as a community of people
is you're tarring all 2 billion Muslims.
You're tarring all 2 billion.
That's still too many.
2 billion. You are tarring, let me finish, you are tarring all 2 billion people with the same brush of being killers and rapists and so on. To which I say to you, that is the purest personification of vile bigotry, racism, and Islamophobia. Why don't you focus on people of all religions
they follow a
who commit
book
heinous
that
crimes?
calls for the murder of Jews, Christians, Hindus, and infidels just because we don't abide, we don't bow down to their stupid rock, Piers Morgan. We don't do that in Christianity. In Christianity, if you want to be an atheist, if you want to worship a cow, if you want to worship a table, you're allowed to do that without getting killed.
Citation needed? I feel like the history of European Christianity has mostly been involved in exactly that, in exactly the oppression of those with different viewpoints. In fact, you look at, for example, the history of European Jewry, for example, they fled to the Ottoman Empire, who offered them refuge from European Christians. So you might want to open a history textbook, Valentina. Not that I'm sure she's read any textbooks. Now, also on Piers Morgan's YouTube show was British journalist Sami Hamdi. We've previously covered on Novara Live how Hamdi was arrested and detained by ICE after his US visa was revoked after he had arrived without him being informed, on grounds of him allegedly supporting terrorism. He was brought in by Morgan to respond to Gomez's Islamophobic rhetoric, and he did not disappoint.
She keeps talking about this idea of rapists and the like. Piers, I went to the website of the Office for National Statistics and the Bureau of Justice of the Americans. And here you can see, these are all the victims saying who their perpetrators are. And here they say that it's people that they know, it's their family members, it's their friends, it's their acquaintances. Only this small number over here is done by strangers or what she calls grooming gangs. You can see the overwhelming majority are done by those that they know or those or their relatives. Nobody says this is white Christian sexual epidemic. If you look at the population, she says that they're being taken over. This is the population of Muslims in the UK and in the US. In the US, 1.1%, in the UK, 6%. Tell me, where is the takeover that's taking place here? Piers, when you look at the crimes that are committed against Brits, and I'm a Brit, I'm born and raised here, against our sisters and our daughters and the like, here are the crimes committed by Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris. Nobody says this is white Christian rape. No one says this is a white Christian problem. Everybody says crime has no faith and it has no race. This was committed by vile individuals and justice should be delivered. Piers, when you look at the Office of National Statistics and you see the number of people incarcerated in the UK, you can see that they are overwhelmingly white. But nobody says that this country has a white criminal problem. No one says that this is a Christian problem. Everybody says this is a criminal problem by vile people because crime has no faith and crime has no race. Piers, when you look at the mass shootings in America that kill students and kill their children, this is the data from the Bureau of Justice in America. This is by white shooters, this is by ethnic minorities. No one says that in America they have a white Christian shooting problem because they know crime has no faith, they know crime has no race, and they know that it is individuals who need to be brought to justice.
I will point out, of course, when it comes to per capita numbers, that's slightly higher maybe for some ethnic minorities, right? But broadly, it doesn't make up to a particularly large demographic shift. And in a majority white country, majority Christian country, the majority of people in prison will be of that demographic, right? The idea that somehow there is a specific demographic that can be specifically called out as being responsible for these things obviously is nonsense unless you're being fed or are someone who is delivering propaganda to try and drive a certain political narrative. Now, finally, Hamdi was asked by Morgan whether or not it was right that Gomez had her visa revoked.
Piers, part of me believes that it would have been good for Valentina to come and see the real Britain. The Britain that belongs to the family that I am in. The English blood that runs through my kids from Stenning, Brighton. It would have been good for her to come and meet the wonderful giants of Britain who are Muslim, like Timothy Winter in Cambridge, like Paul Williams, like Paul Keeler, like Suhail Hanif. It would have been good for her to see the realities of what Britain is like and how Muslims live in Britain and contribute to society. Because when Tucker Carlson finally saw it, instead of regurgitating the hate that he was doing in 2001, Tucker Carlson came out and said, I was wrong and I didn't know that Muslims love Jesus too and they believe in the second coming. When Candace finally got to see the reality, she came out and said that I was disgusted with myself for not looking in further. I believe Valentina is still young. She's in the early stages of what Tucker Carlson was. I'm asking her, skip the years that it takes to figure it out. Go and see what the world looks like. Go and see the reality because your message of hate didn't work.
I find it quite interesting. If you look at the whole clip, right, and you look at Piers Morgan's rhetoric and compare it to Sami Hamdi, Piers Morgan just goes, oh, you're being bigoted, you're being Islamophobic, you're being racist, but doesn't really kind of improve upon that analysis of what she said. But Sami Hamdi, really powerful, saying, look, here's the statistics to show that there is no like huge problem in terms of Muslims being an issue. When it comes to the people who've actually changed their opinions on this, it's because they've spent their time to look, to spend time with those people that they demonize, to reach across the aisle and try and learn something. Wow. Which of these two approaches do you think is more successful?
I think Sami Hamdi offered a masterclass there, right? And I agree, actually, that she should be allowed in the UK for precisely that reason.
Yep, I agree.
The clip as well earlier about the things she was saying with regards to the Bible. I mean, there are awful things in the Bible. Awful. Abraham had slaves. Slavery is allowed in the Old Testament. God calls on collective punishment, things we'd consider war crimes. He calls on the Israelites to destroy entire cities, entire peoples. You know, Jericho is the most famous example. So this idea that there's no conquest and death and collective punishment and even genocide in the Old Testament simply isn't true. We can park for a minute the things it says about same-sex relationships, about women, about all manner of things. Just what she mentioned there, completely inaccurate. And you're right, of course, that the history of European Christendom isn't quite as rosy as she seems to think. But I do think that she should have come here. And let me give you one example that I know of locally. So there's a local councillor in the city where I live. He's Pakistani. He's Labour, Pakistani Muslim. He was doing a litter pick with his son, who I think is maybe 10, maybe a bit younger. He was doing a litter pick with his son, just those two, in a poorer part of the city. They're from the north of the city, so, you know, it's the less affluent part of the city. They were doing a litter pick. I think it was his son's birthday. And a bunch of reform guys basically start calling them names. They were pissed. They were drunk. They start being abusive, obnoxious. You know, who's being decent and civilized in that situation? Is it the people that are trying to make their city better? They just happen to be Muslims? Or is it the pissed up middle-aged men literally intimidating a child trying to pick up litter? I mean, it's pathetic. So the idea that people like that are a problem is obviously absurd. And also, finally, this kind of revisiting of what Islam is by the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens is really interesting. You know, if you speak to, particularly my limited knowledge about this is Iranian women, very common name in Iran, Maryam, Mary, mother of Jesus, a virgin in Islam as well as Christianity. They say, I cover my hair because I want to maintain the modesty of Maryam. You know, that should be quite if you're a Christian Western country, that should be quite an easy thing to understand. You might not agree with it, but it should be quite easy to understand. And yet the veil, the head covering, is viewed as something very alien, very foreign, actually completely at odds with Christianity. I think what Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, I don't agree with Candace Owens on very much, to be quite frank. What I think they realised is actually on things like that, they're more in touch with the kind of Christian heritage of Europe than modern Europe is. Fine, you might think, good, whatever, but it's not a foreign import. That's the point, right? There are common roots that nourish both Islam and Christianity and Judaism. You know, the two agree on some things and disagree on others. But things like the head covering, the relationship to the Virgin Mary, the relationship to Jesus Christ. He's not the Messiah in Islam, but he is a prophet and he's going to come back. There's a Jesus 2.0 in Christianity and Islam. You know, these are things that I think, frankly, it's the ignorance of these things which allows, you know, Islamophobic bigotry to thrive. And I do agree that actually the more you talk about it, the more exposure there is, the less of it you'll see.
I think what is sad as well is I think that we're entering this era where you see people who just want to find the most outrageous thing that they can say gains them fame and notoriety online on the internet with following the algorithms, when actually the expansion of things like the internet and social media has been a great vector for some people to experience and to learn about cultures they never would have done otherwise. And I think that if we have more of an opportunity to understand those things, then it can only lead to a good place. Like you look at in the wake of the Southport riots in the UK, where huge amounts of damage done in Southport. First community on the scene out there, trying to clean things up, people coming together from all different communities, but there was Muslims from the local mosque coming there to help clean up their own city, to help clean up their own town, to be able to repair the damage that had been done by discohesion. And it really is, I think, it's civilizational vandalism that we have so much space here for people who are only there to not serve a narrative because they believe it to be correct, but to do so because there is an algorithmic engagement with which to do so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's quite new, you know. You read these books from the early 2000s talking about how wonderful Islam is. But then, of course, you get 9/11, you get the war on terror. And clearly in the West, many things have gone wrong since the global financial crisis of 2008. And it's a very easy enemy, a very identifiable enemy as well. This is really important.
It's a specifically really good enemy to have in a world where there's no Soviet Union anymore.
Well,
right?
quite.
It's the same. We backed Islam against the communists in Afghanistan, and they were the heroes. They were the brave fighters of the Mujahideen back then. So now there's no Soviet Union. There is no geopolitical bloc with which the West can be able to position itself against. Post 2001 world, suddenly it's against Islam.
But the beauty of Islam is, with regards to that, is that they're local. You can see them. Right. So during the Cold War, the threat of the Soviet Union, or whatever, the perceived threat of the Soviet Union, was quite an alien, distant thing. Right. But actually, if you're really upset with your life and your city and your locality and things aren't going well, and actually decline, right, is a big thing. By the way, it's very real. We are in decline because of our economic system, because of what's happened in the global economy in the West really over the last 20 years. You might think that's all real, and that the amazing thing with Islam as a source of bigotry is there's a guy up the road. There's a mosque that's being built, right? So it's not, you know, completely alien. And you haven't met the 1%. You don't know any billionaires. You know, you've maybe never been to West London. You've never maybe been to London, right? Bishop's Avenue, Millionaires Row. So you only know what you see. And what you see is there are these people over here, and there's this big meta-narrative about how they're the problem. I have to say, a few years ago, I was working for IPPR, think tank, just freelance work. And we were recording a video. I shouldn't really say this, should I? We were recording a video about a particular document they were bringing out. And one of the funders was speaking in the video. Right? This big hedge fund guy, I think, big finance guy. And we were recording this clip that he was going to say. And I went to his flat in Mayfair. I didn't realize flats could be this big. I mean, I'm being deadly serious. I had no idea. And I go in there and I see the size of it. There's a gym there, 5 or 6 bedrooms. It's like caves. It's just endless. And I'm thinking, wow. And I'm somebody, you know, I've studied in London. I've lived here 15 years, master's degree, UCL. My wife went to the LSE. You know, the LSE on a Friday, they're all taking their bags to the airport to go back home to Rome or Paris or Stockholm. But even for somebody like me, I was like, I've never seen this before. And so it's very, very hard to comprehend who the quote-unquote enemy is, or who is benefiting from this failing economic system. So Muslims are so convenient in so many ways.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that one piece of data, one data point that really hammers this home, right, is that when you look at the kind of people who have this really kind of thermostatic reaction to changing demographics and migration, they don't live in areas with high migration. They live in areas that could potentially be areas with high migration. Right? You see the narrative is, when you look at London, people who write narratives about how bad London is, about how crime-ridden it is, don't live in London. It's a way of, there's a scare campaign from the right, especially to paint the leafy suburbia, painting little villages and towns outside of London as this is what you will become if we allow this level of immigration, right? When actually, if there's just more contact, if there was more direct contact between these communities, and we saw, like what happened post-Southport, we saw these communities coming together. We saw one of the Green candidates to potentially be there, to be selected for Gorton and Denton, Faisal Reza Khan. He put together a whole community group in response to the arena bombings in Manchester to make sure that there was community cohesion. And that level of coming together, when you experience it firsthand, it's a really good way to be able to push past the simple bigotries and the simple narratives that can be driven by those who haven't had direct experience of multiculturalism.
So we're having a bit of a lib loving. So somebody who's right wing, GB News watching, or maybe a Reform person might be not liking what we're saying. So let me sort of, I agree with you, but let me just sort of wind back. So again, this was a kind of eye-opening moment for me when I was in Runcorn, covering the by-election. Very white, it's in Cheshire, very, very white place. And I remember being in a really run-down part of Runcorn. I can't remember what it's called, Shopping City, shopping centre, 70s style shopping centre. It's seen better days, lots of it's closed. And then mostly older, lots of white people, leave voting. It'd been Labour. Reform won by 6 votes. I thought Reform actually probably won by more, but I think Labour had a great postal vote campaign. Regardless, I've been walking around all day, very lovely people, lots of pubs, sunny day, lots of beer, a bit like today. And then when I'm there are 4 guys and they're speaking what sounds like maybe Ethiopian or Somali. They're sat down just together talking. And it kind of clicked. In London, I wouldn't think twice about these guys. But because Runcorn is so white, that's precisely why it becomes conspicuous. So that's me sort of trying to explain that phenomenon a bit, which I never really understood, but now I understand it a little bit better. And then in terms of these scare stories about London, which I've been thinking about a lot, crime in London's gone down.
It has, significantly.
Massively. And you see the photos of London from the 70s and the 80s, the 90s. It looks a lot better now. It's not working for working people, but it looks a lot better now. However, I think we have a significant amount of low-level crime, shoplifting, mobile phone theft, graffiti, whatever. And I just think the fact this is now recordable and distributable through social media networks and mobile phones, I think that has changed the political consciousness of people a bit, even including people in London. So I don't know how you address that. Do you just say it's fake? Do you just put it down as a technological phenomenon? But I do feel like that low-level antisocial stuff, you might not find it antisocial, some people do, that low-level antisocial stuff now being recorded, now being shared, and there are incentives to share it, to get outraged, to get attention. I do think that's a challenge for the left.
Oh, certainly, I think it is. I mean, there was a Hassan Piker clip on an MIT podcast just recently where he was talking about like the efficacy of stealing from large corporations. I'm like, well, this kind of stuff we shouldn't be treating as whether we care about the individual action or not. There's a socially deleterious effect of allowing the social contract to break down to the point people feel emboldened to not care. And that is what the left's project should be. We need to be fixing all of the underlying things. We need to create a new social contract to be able to bring people in, talk about the systemic failures that have led us to this point, which is, of course, this fact that outside, I think Aaron Jarjit Dubé's latest book about the wage model has shown that outside of 7 years of tight labour markets, working people, very little gains outside of the existing growth level, very little actual gains in terms of wage labour. And we need to fix that, because otherwise, if we continue down this road where social fabric breaks apart, people continually in this world of cost of living crisis, that low-level crime will continue to be exacerbated and will end up in this, it'll only go further down to make our society feel less cohesive. Because we can't live, as the left, in this world of there being no society. That's our project moving forward, is to find what that new society looks like and how we engage in policy to be able to get us there.
Completely agree.